It is inconceivable to this court that she could have killed Mr. Leath and taken the steps necessary to establish an alibi within the time frame established. The defendant, Raynella Leath, is not guilty.
It is a story that captured East Tennessee's attention for decades. A prominent nurse, a respected prosecutor, a retired barber, a disgraced judge. 2 deaths, 3 trials. In this episode of Behind the Headline, Raynella Dossett Leath, a woman many called a black widow. Her story begins in 1992. Raynella's husband, Knox County District Attorney Ed Dossett, was found dead on their farm. Here is the first story we aired, reported by then WBIR reporter Carmen Ainsworth.
The news came as a shock to friends and family of Ed Dossett. He had just returned from UT Medical Center, where he was undergoing treatment for cancer. Assistant Attorney General David Jennings says Dossett felt good enough to go out into his field when the accident happened.
At about 3 p.m. this afternoon, he and his wife, Raynella, were feeding cattle at the family farm, and the cattle surged and Ed was knocked down and trampled. Raynella administered emergency CPR, but Ed was pronounced dead by the medical staff of Park West Hospital as a result of this accident.
Dossett, a Republican, was elected to the District Attorney General's office in 1982 and re-elected in 1990. Knoxville Police Chief Phil Keith and Deputy Chief Rudy Bradley say they expressed their deepest regret to his family, and they say the law enforcement community has lost a great asset. Carmen Ainsworth, Action 10 News Today.
But questions about Dossett's death would linger for years. Questions raised by those who would later investigate another death in Raynella's life. With that, though, let me bring in 2 reporters who covered this story truly from beginning to end and the other stories that followed. Jamie Satterfield, a former reporter with the Knoxville News Sentinel, joining us, and John North, a former reporter with the Sentinel as well, and now our WBIR senior investigative producer. Guys, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. And let's go ahead and just preface this. There is a lot to unpack with this story. A lot.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, let's dive in. 1992, Ed Dossett dead. Do you remember that moment when you heard the news?
Well, I will tell you this. I was living in Kansas City working as a reporter in 92, but in 93, I came here to cover the state courts. And as I was planning my move from Kansas City to Knoxville, our beloved boss, Tom Chester, was telling me on the telephone, there are some things that you need to understand about, the job you're about to take. And one of them is that our DA last year died in a bizarre manner. He was trampled by cattle. And I said, what?
Yeah.
That's a
Weird.
new one on me. And he said, yeah, well, we think it's kind of odd too. But so that was one of sort of the curious aspects when I came onto the scene. I'm like, okay, we have a new DA. It was Randy Nichols, who had been a judge and then wanted to be the prosecutor. And when Ed Dossett died, he became the DA. And always hanging over my time as the reporter covering the state courts was this idea that the former DA had died on his farm trampled by cattle. That just never sort of rested well with me.
And you?
Well, I was a journalist by that time. I was still working at the local paper where I live in Sevierville. But I remember it because my first reaction was, that did not happen. This man was a farmer and worked with cattle all of his life, perfectly comfortable with, farm/ranching, whatever you want to call it. So the idea that he would be trampled by his own cattle, plus he was sick. He had cancer. Why was he even out around cattle, right? None of it made sense to me. But at that time, I was still a couple of years away from joining the Sentinel. So just as a person, I thought, I ain't buying that. But I didn't think much more about it.
Did the people investigating, though, did they buy that at this time? Because that's, you know, it's out there, it's suspicious, but did you ever hear after the fact from law enforcement officers who maybe were covering it from the beginning that this just wasn't adding up?
Oh, sure. I mean, if you wander around the city-county building, which is the center of government for Knox County, once you get to know people and they get to know you and something comes up, they'll be like, yeah, that's an interesting one. And they'll just kind of give you one of these looks. And the Dossett case was not the only one. As you well know, you know, when you started at the paper, you were covering law enforcement. But, oh, yeah, that was always a, you know, one where everybody kind of twisted their head and said, well, you know, this was always kind of an unresolved question.
But Raynella was a nurse. And it's almost that thought of, surely, you know, okay, yeah, it's questionable, but, you know, here's this respected nurse. She couldn't do that, could she?
Well, but I will say behind the scenes, one of the things that Raynella had done when Ed was first diagnosed and they made this announcement that he was sick, there was a question, obviously, of could he do the job, right? He seemed okay, but a lot of what I heard was a little scuttlebutt about how she kind of took over, wouldn't really let anybody take his post, so to speak, was very protective over him, and that people in the office did not have a real sense of just how sick or not sick that he was. And then the other side of that, yes, that her being a nurse, that she would have taken good care of him. You know, I found those two things, that people, one, found her reaction and the way that she handled things up until his death odd, but other people who had entire faith in the woman. So
he was also a relatively young man.
Yes,
early 40s, something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, he was sick. That's unfortunate.
Yeah,
he
well,
was
absolutely.
sick, but he was a relatively young man.
All right, well, let's move this forward because, as we said, there's a lot to get to. Now, 6 months after Dossett's death, Raynella married his friend, David Leath. Let's then go to 2003. David Leath then found dead in their home, shot in the head. Raynella said it was suicide, but investigators said the evidence told another story. She was charged with first-degree murder, and thereafter, investigators also reopened the case of her first husband, Ed Dossett. Her first trial began in 2009. It ended in a hung jury. Now, before we dig into that trial, let's talk about David Leath's death. She says she comes in to the bedroom. He's dead, shot in their bed. Wow. Is that, at this point, are you covering this story? Okay. You hear this. What happens?
You know, what I first keyed in on was a Knox County Sheriff's Office detective who I knew well and admired his work, Perry Moyers. He was immediately suspicious. They were pretty guarded at the scene because at that time I'm on the cop beat, so I roll, you know. They were very guarded about what they were saying, but back then you could hang out at scenes, and you know, Perry seemed to me to be suspicious about this, so that put me on alert right away. One of the things we very quickly figured out on why he was suspicious is if it's a suicide, it's a 3-shot suicide. And the percentages of that occurring in history are pretty minuscule.
Okay, let's talk about that. Yeah, this is getting into the trial now. That had to be quite the experience to listen because you mentioned 3-shot, but 1 shot killed him. How did they describe this in the trial as having played out?
Well, you remind me, for all trials, did they get a special prosecutor?
Yes.
Because I think they would have, right? They probably would have recused themselves.
Yeah, Randy Nichols then was still in charge. So.
As Jamie says, there was that red flag. There were a lot of red flags, but let's start with the gun, which David's daughter said he didn't like guns. He didn't want guns. This was an old gun, an old revolver, which supposedly came from maybe David's family. But this is important. So there are 6 bullets in the chamber. It's a revolver. David is right-handed. He's on the bed, and the gun is found next to his left hand. So the defense's theory is, oh, he committed suicide. The prosecution's theory is she did it. And the way she did it was, according to the state, fired 1 shot while he's in bed. He's not well. He is not well. He had retired. He was concerned that his mental acuity was slipping, and he was at home in bed. They would also find that there was various medications in his system. So he's lying in bed. The state's theory is she fires 1 shot, misses, and it goes into the headboard. So then the state says, okay, then she fires right about here and gets it right in square in his forehead. It, according to, I think, the autopsy, severs his brainstem, so he's done. Medically speaking, he's done. But there's a 3rd gunshot that gets fired from that revolver, and it goes into the mattress. And the state's theory is she wanted gunshot residue, and that's why she had it there. She fired that 3rd shot deliberately. He's found, again, gun is near his left side, and you tell me, wasn't his hand?
Yes, it was twisted.
It was kind of like crumpled near or under him, which makes no sense. You can, there are photographs.
If you shot yourself, you're not going to.
There are photographs in which it's like, how did that happen? Again, a right-handed man. And supposedly the defense says, oh, he committed suicide by...
On the left side with his left hand.
It doesn't make any sense.
It
doesn't make any sense.
No.
Prosecution's like, oh, she did it. She staged it. And the 2nd shot was the fatal shot.
Okay, so we're in the midst of the trial out here, but we do need to back up because some life instances happened in Raynella's life leading up to this, right? Child.
Very significant.
She lost a child.
Very significant. Yes. So we mentioned that she and David got married in early '94. Something really tragic and sad happened in December of '94. The Dossetts, when Raynella was married to Ed, they had 3 kids. They had 2 daughters and a son. And the son was named Eddie. And in December of '94, when he was 11, there was a terrible car crash. One of the daughters was driving. Eddie was in the car. Raynella was in the car. I think they were trying to cross Pellissippi Parkway, which, you know, it's no fun doing it today, and it was probably no fun doing it 30 years ago. But there was a car crash, and Eddie died. Little Eddie died in that crash. A horrible thing, devastating for the family, devastating for Raynella. Okay, again, as you said, there's so much that was going on in this situation. In 1995, a man named Steve Walker, who was married to Ed's secretary/assistant, was getting a divorce. They were getting a divorce, and it was discovered that one of the children that they had, a son, was not Steve Walker's son. It was Ed Dossett's son. He fathered a little boy with his secretary/assistant in 1988. That was a bombshell.
Walker's wife.
Correct.
Right.
That was a bombshell. Nobody knew it. At least I never picked up on that. Did you ever pick up on that?
No.
I never picked up on that. I would assume the DA's office.
Well kept secret.
I was going to say, so
That was well kept.
this did not come out in the trial.
No.
This information
Oh, no,
did not,
no.
because it was separate from what she was being tried.
You know, the city-county building leaks a lot of secrets, but every once in a while they keep a whopper, and that was a whopper. So Steve learns this is not his son. He still loves the boy, but it comes out in a divorce proceeding that he is not the father of this little boy. And he informs Raynella in, I think, the spring of '95 about what's going on and what he's learned. And he works at a transmission shop here in North Knoxville, does great work. I've had him do it. Coincidentally, he's done great work on my stick shift through the years. But Raynella, according to Steve Walker, shows up at the transmission shop and says, I want to talk to you about this case.
Got papers to show.
I've got papers to show you. I want you to come with me out to the farm, which is in Solway. And Steve Walker, who's a nice fella. I mean, what you see is what you get with Steve Walker.
Right.
He says, okay. And so they go drive out to the farm. And this is in May, I think, of '95. And he recounts the story to various media and says, we were best of friends, we were chummy, everything was fine until we got to that farm. And she's like, okay, let me show you the papers, and leads him to a barn. And he's like, okay. And she says, they're in that bucket over there in the corner. And he starts to walk that way, and he says, suddenly, she pulls out a .38 and commences to shooting. Now, something...
And then chases him. He runs,
Yeah.
and she chases
Chased
after
him across the
This
farm.
was a kind of elongated deal, because he recounts, he's running, he's looking back all the time, he falls at some point, and essentially he ends up hiding and waiting her out, hoping that she will retreat, and she ultimately did.
She would ultimately accuse him of coming to the farm to piss on Ed's grave. He's buried there on the
Right.
site. Steve Walker's like, no, she brought me out to the farm. So she got prosecuted for that. It all kind of got quietly resolved. Special judge, as I recall, got resolved. I'm disappointed in myself. They quietly resolved it in Anderson County, and I wasn't there for that. But it got resolved, and it went away.
Okay, so let's recount where we are. Raynella's first husband, Ed, dies in an accident. She marries his friend David.
Best friend, David.
Best friend David. In the course of this, her son dies. She finds out that her first husband fathered a child
A boy.
from her secretary, his secretary, I should say. Then the husband of the secretary shares this with Raynella. We have a little shooting. Now we're back to 2003. The trial. Raynella's standing trial for the murder of her second husband, David Leath. You're in the courtroom. Are you watching? How is Raynella acting through this? What is the jury taking in as they're watching this play out, especially when it comes to her?
Well, I want to back up a little bit, because David Leath was killed in 2003, but he wasn't. She wasn't immediately charged.
That's right. That's right. Thank you.
And you really have to credit David Leath's daughter, Cindy, because she fully believed that her father was murdered. She described that he went from somebody who was very active, went to the gym every morning, very concerned always about his appearance. He was a good-looking guy, kind of, back in the day we would have said that was a metrosexual kind of thing. But certainly not a man who seemed to be struggling with any mental or physical infirmities. But she began to notice things. Raynella's taking him to the doctor. He's suddenly on medication. And we have to always go back to Raynella is a nurse. She knows medicine. So Cindy had suspicions that she probably would not have given voice to at that time. But she was a little concerned. And there was some trouble that she was seeing between Raynella and David. And Raynella, she did a diary, I think, that would later, prosecutors would later say this was part of her effort, premeditated, to have an excuse for his suicide,
Months
right?
before
So she details in this diary that he's mean to her, and that he's moody, and
she
all
cries.
of these things, right? That she
Kind of laying
cries.
the foundation.
Yes,
Could be.
Yes,
Yes.
That's that's one way to
Allegedly.
take it.
Allegedly.
So Cindy gets fed up, and what we now know is that Perry Moyers was too. And so she filed a wrongful death suit, and I think maybe 2006.
I think 6.
And Perry ended up being a pretty integral part of that. He testified as part of that about his suspicions, and it's only in that process that finally, they bring in a team from Chattanooga as prosecutors on it, and then finally that she is charged in David's death with first-degree murder, and then and there was some fighting in court, and I think John and another fellow, Jim Ballot, covered that extensively, but there was fights about Ed because they needed to exhume his body.
As they're pushing toward
Yes, yes.
David's
Right,
case.
because now they're saying this is a pattern with this woman, right? And so they do ultimately, they're able to get the autopsy and the toxicology, more importantly, revisited. And when they do, they discover enough morphine in his system.
And this is Ed.
Yes,
Now
Ed. That there's no way he's standing up or working out there among the cattle on his own volition, is the conclusion of the current. She was new at that time, Dorinka Malusnik-Polchin, but she, anyway,
Medical
she
examiner.
opined, yes, that Ed Dossett, too, had been drugged, and that the scene was staged, and she opined that that was a homicide. That was huge. And so they ultimately come out with an indictment, a second indictment, charging her in Ed's death. So the context of this trial is, right, they decide to go with what they feel is a fresher, stronger case, and that is David Leath.
Right.
But the Ed case is sitting there.
Okay.
So I want to paint that context.
And also, Judge Baumgartner had been asked several times, Judge, we need to dig up Ed
Yes.
Dossett's body.
And he's the one who's presiding
Correct.
over all of this.
And he's like, no,
Yep.
no, no. They never did dig up Ed's
No.
body, correct?
No.
But there was that effort.
She was ultimately able to use records from the prior
Okay.
to conclude, but yeah, that was a big concern.
And the original medical examiner was Dr. Pettigo, is that
Randall
correct?
Pettigo.
Back in
He
92?
was
That's another
not-
behind the headline coming
Yeah,
up.
yeah, that's
He
coming up.
was not a board-certified forensic pathologist, which meant that he could not himself conduct autopsies, which is crazy to me. When
He's
I'm
in that position, but
Yeah.
can't do
He was
that.
a surgeon at UT.
Right. So what he would have to do is get in a forensic pathologist to actually do the work, and he oversaw. And his work in the Ed Dossett case was under suspicion from the get-go, I think. Perry certainly was looking at it funny. And when, over the course of time, where Pettigo ultimately falls apart, if you will, and his life comes unraveled, and you find out he's a criminal himself, and not at all qualified for the job he held, it really, to me, threw into question any autopsy that he signed off on. And then he has changing stories, right? At first, he defends his work. Then he says, well, I was wrong, I didn't, But then by the time we're getting on the trial, well, one, he's not credible anymore. He's had his own interactions with law enforcement. But now he's going back and defending his work. So he was completely unreliable. So really, that first trial is the first time that you put in front of a jury some of these issues about how cases were investigated. Now, I will say they were not allowed to bring in or bring up anything about Ed Dossett in the Leath trial, but it's hanging back there. We're all watching that. We all know it. No, jury wasn't, but the rest of us did.
Okay, so for clarity's sake, David Leath shot in 2003. Trial in 2009.
The first.
That's first
So
trial.
what we've just talked about from 2003 to 2009, all this is fomenting, if you will. Trial, 2009. You both in there?
Jamie, well,
I
we were
actually-
closely monitoring
Yeah,
it.
we
Yes,
were
for
sure.
monitoring it. I was busy in another case that y'all featured,
Yes.
the Christian Newsom case, but I paid attention to it
Right.
because on the police beat I had dealt with the Dossett and then Steve Walker. I mean, I was tied up in it just as anybody else
Sure.
would be. So a couple of things I will note is James A.H. Bell was her attorney. And he's an excellent attorney, and he's also somewhat flamboyant. And so here he comes. This is the first time I'd ever seen this, where he brings in a bed, the bed that David Leath is laying in, as a prop, if you will. And so for the entirety of that trial, essentially you have a bed in the courtroom, and then they're doing a lot of the strings and the blood spatter evidence and analysis and all of that. But the contrast was stark. She either is guilty of sin, or she's innocent, wrongfully accused, and how terrible. There was no middle ground.
Terribly unlucky, or the
Yes.
opposite.
Exactly.
This is one other thing you mentioned, you know, this is going on and who's paying attention. Let me talk about myself personally. In the 90s, I was in that courtroom and every courtroom every day there. And I knew a lot of what was going on, and I knew the judge as well. Then I moved over to sort of a managerial role. So I have always felt like, you know, there were things going on with the judge, which we're going to discuss.
We'll get into that.
Judge Baumgartner was handling the case. He had a serious substance abuse problem. He'd had physical ailments. He'd fallen into addiction. And he becomes such a profound factor in this prosecution as well. And I've always felt like I was over there, you know, trying to be a manager at the paper, and I am sorry that I didn't understand better what was happening to him. Because candidly, I think I probably would have called him on it, and I would have said, what is up with you? Because he had problems.
There were issues
And
that were obvious.
It's the kind of thing that it would have made me angry. I would have been concerned, but I also would have been angry. I would have been like, what is going on with you? Because I could have said that to him. And I have always kind of felt like, but you know, it was a mess. It was a mess. It was a mess. It became a mess.
It was a mess. The trial, 2009, and then the verdict in that trial comes back.
It's a hung jury. We don't get a verdict.
No verdict.
Right.
No verdict in this.
Which is kind of the worst thing.
We now
get.
know that the vote was 11-1 to convict,
Without one.
but we had one. So hung jury.
What was the reaction in the courtroom?
I think Raynella was relieved. You know, it's better than, especially I think when they learned about the 11-1, she was
Yeah.
very relieved. I'm certain the state was frustrated. I think there was a real question about, are they going to retry, right? But once they polled the jury, and they don't always do that, or at least I think the bailiffs always know, you know. But,
Yes.
They know.
but once they polled that jury, very quickly they moved to retry.
Yeah, okay, to that point, 2010, the second trial. A jury heard much of the same evidence. Former WBIR reporter Yvette Martinez was in the courtroom when the verdict was handed down.
First degree murder, how does the jury find on that count of the indictment, sir?
We found the defendant guilty.
Guilty of first degree murder.
Raynella Dossett Leath's daughters were overcome with emotions. Judge Richard Baumgartner cleared the courtroom as they said goodbye to their mother. She was taken into custody immediately.
She's in jail being fingerprinted. We're getting her medicines to her, getting the nursing to do a clinical assessment.
David Leath's first wife and his daughter were also emotional as they left the courtroom.
We finally seen justice, and our family's been through it for so long.
It has been nearly 7 years since Cindy Wilkerson lost her father.
Relieved. Just a big burden off my shoulders, just relief.
The Leath family and prosecutors are relieved to get closure, but they are aware of the toll this will take on the 61-year-old breast cancer survivor's family.
Great sympathy for the children of Raynella Dossett Leath and the hardship they must be going through, but we were called here to do a job.
Prosecutors and the victim's family thanked the lead prosecutor who became a target for the defense, but Detective Perry Moyers feels vindicated with the verdict.
They attacked him in a personal way, which was inappropriate, and he has suffered long and greatly with this case, as all of us have.
Okay, what changed between that first trial and the second trial? Hung jury, first trial, guilty, second.
You know, I don't think the proof changed at all. Each side, because of the first trial, had gotten a preview of the other, you know, so they honed their game. They upped their game because they know now what the state's going to bring, what the defense is going to say. But I didn't find that it largely changed. There was no new smoking gun or some, you know, defense revelation. It was really a repeat. What I will say is that Judge Baumgartner became more of a force, if you will, in this second trial, in that there was chatter. We now know. Now I've got to stress that we did not know this at the time, but what we now know is that one of the bailiffs in his courtroom was concerned about his actual behavior during that trial, nodding off, saying inappropriate things, making remarks that she thought the jury he should not have made. So he came into play. At that time, he was one of those pilot project judges who allowed jurors to ask questions. And he managed that process, right? And there was some interactions that he made with the jury. Now whether, if there's fault, that whether that bent toward Raynella or not, that would later be kind of litigated. But that was the 2010 case. He seemed more involved than perhaps a judge ought be.
And you said you noticed these changes leading up.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people in the judicial system would later admit that they had seen things that concern them. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, A.H. Bell, I think it was in trial number 2, hadn't he taken pictures?
Yes, took a photo of the judge.
Because he was concerned. You mentioned the bailiff. I think she took some pictures. Meredith did. We started hearing murmurs, but I think it was 2010. And we've talked about this on the Behind the Headline about the Christian Newsom case. We used to stream Christian Newsom, and remember, I don't remember which trial it was, but we were streaming it. We were all watching it in the newsroom. You were in the courtroom. He's trying to take the verdict, and he is so messed up. The jury foreman is trying to give him the verdict. He can't follow it.
Right.
He absolutely cannot follow it. And I remember sitting there going, what is wrong with him? He'd had a problem with his, I think, amino acids or blood sugar or something in the 90s, which I had written about, which irritated him and his family. But so what? So I was always kind of attuned to his health, and I was like, he is out of it. Well, it's the same era as trial number 2.
Right.
It's the same era. It's the same manifestation of this huge problem.
And that is going to play into what happens next. But let's talk about once that verdict was read, guilty. What was the reaction from the community that you can recall? Was there shock? Did the community and family members, depending upon which side you were on, feel like justice was served?
Well, I will say I think there certainly was a segment that was like, well, finally, finally this has happened, there are not, there's a segment that was like, that's not a coincidence, what happened in 92, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's this pattern, which you mentioned. So there was certainly a segment of the community, probably in the legal community, was like, well, there you go.
But now I want to say significantly, the state was so confident in its conviction that they end up dismissing the murder charge against Ed, and I think they will later regret that.
Did Raynella's demeanor change from the first trial to the second trial that you can recall?
Raynella is one of the most steely people I've ever seen. She handles herself well. She looks forward. She doesn't make a lot of facial expressions. And she's got these, and I'm sorry, they're beautiful blue eyes, but some people would say steely eyes. That's what captures me about her. But I will say that she rarely has expressed strong emotion in either of these. Now that will change in the third trial. But she seemed to kind of square her shoulders and did not seem to react a lot. I think that her children, the daughters, were somewhat devastated. They believed in their mother. And then Cindy, on David Leath's side, she certainly felt like she got justice finally. Because she, to this day does not believe at all that her father committed suicide. So I find that there were strong feelings. Black widow was not a casual term being thrown around. I think that generally, if you polled people, anybody that had heard about the whole history of the case thought she killed 2 husbands. But you did have people that were close to her who felt just as strongly the other way, that she was innocent.
So, Raynella, sentenced to life in prison. Many thought, of course, the story had reached its end, but it was far from over. A third jury would hear this case against Raynella in 2017 after she appealed for a new trial because of Judge Richard Baumgartner's judicial misconduct, his drug use, and a whole scandal on its own right there that we will dig into in future episodes. Judge Paul Summers presided over the third trial, and then he made a decision that shocked everyone. Here's former WBIR reporter Jim Matheny.
We don't know.
Wednesday, the attorneys on both sides made their final case.
The evidence tells you what it means.
And the fate of Raynella Leath was headed to a jury, just like in 2009 when a jury could not decide if she killed her husband in 2003, and just like the retrial in 2010 when a jury convicted her.
Guilty of first-degree murder.
But in 2017, the judge made the decision for the jury.
The court finds that the state has failed to meet the required element of identity of Raynella Leath as a person who committed the crime charged. It is inconceivable to this court that she could have killed Mr. Leath and taken the steps necessary to establish an alibi within the time frame established. The defendant, Raynella Leath, is not guilty.
Prosecutors have called Leath a black widow. She's also suspected of killing her first husband in 1992, when she was married to Knox County DA Ed Dossett. Those charges were dropped when Raynella was convicted of killing her second husband, David Leath. The DA would not comment on whether Leath could still face charges for Dossett's death in 1992. So for now, Leath walks away a free woman. In downtown Knoxville, Jim Matheny, WBIR 10 News.
The case dismissed. Raynella free. You watch this play out. Recount, let's go back in that time. Tell us about what that experience was like.
I'll just talk briefly because Jamie was there for all of that and she is the better authority. But I guess I had two reactions. One was astonishment that a judge would do this in the way that he did it, and Jamie can talk more about that. I've covered a lot of trials, Jamie has. There's always the opportunity when the defense can rise after the state is done and say, Judge, they haven't proved their case, you need to dismiss it. A motion for acquittal, that happens at every trial. But the way that this judge handled it was astonishment for me. But the other thing is, candidly speaking, having lived in this community and covered the legal community and touched this case since 1993, for me it was just like, well, there you go. There you go.
Okay.
It's Knox County. What do you want me to say? It's
Right.
Knox County.
Well, I'll tell you this. I have covered hundreds upon hundreds of trials.
Right.
And so things hit me maybe differently than the general public. So it is normal at the end of the state's proof for the defense to make a motion to say they haven't put enough proof on. That gets denied. And then the defense, if they decide to mount proof, and then they'll make the second motion. Well, the state puts on their proof in Raynella's case. In this third trial, we got new prosecutors, same general area they're coming from, Chattanooga area. But Joshua Hedrick, the defense attorney, he makes his motion, and you know, I'm ready to go take a smoke break. And Judge Summers did something really strange. He said he was going to take it under advisement. That never happens, especially at this stage. And so that caught my attention. I started paying attention to Paul Summers. One of the things I noticed, I'm a cowboy boot fan. He wears cowboy boots under his robe. But I started paying attention. I thought something is off.
Yeah.
And then Josh Hedrick is a fabulous lawyer. If you're in trouble, he's one of those that I've got on speed dial. But he put on the exact same case that James A.H. Bell did twice. Maybe did it with a little more flair, but he did. And so the proof, none of the evidence, nothing has changed. It's still 3 shots. It's still the third shot going through the mattress when dude is dead, right? There's no way.
You're not coming back from that.
Yeah, and you can't change that. The brain stem is severed. So the fact of a murder versus a suicide, that seems to be determined. But Josh puts on his defense. He gets some spatter experts, his own, and it's sort of dueling experts, dueling medical examiners, that kind of thing, which we always expect. But he doesn't really make a dent, because what he can't get around is that Raynella has no clear alibi for this time period. The fact that there's enough medication in this man's system to have made him asleep, and in the very least groggy and disoriented should he become awake. There was just, and then they had testimony about the gun itself, and there was just, to me, the proof of murder, was overwhelming, and the proof that she did it was, at least to me, rose to the standard. It's a total jury question.
This is for the jury.
Yes.
This is for the jury to decide.
Right.
This is what the system is built on.
Mm-hmm.
They've heard the proof. This should be in the jury's hands.
Mm-hmm. And so, but the strangest thing happens. So the defense gets done. Josh makes his, and it was a very cursory motion, Judge, we don't think. And that should, normally, Judge would have immediately ruled and it would have went to a jury. Paul Summers takes a break. And I actually left the courtroom to call into the office to go, there's something going on here.
Yes.
So I actually had the pleasure of standing at a bank of cameras that were trained on Raynella's face. And here comes Summers back on the bench. I can't run to the courtroom fast enough, so I'm going to watch it on this camera. And I'm watching her, because in my gut, I knew what was about to happen. And she's looking down. No motion, no nothing, but she's looking down. And then the first thing that Paul Summers says is, "You proved to me that it was a murder." He says that. There is proof here that this was a murder, not suicide. But what the state has utterly failed to do, he says, is prove that she did it, right? And that's the key jury question. Mm-hmm. And he just snatches it from them. The jury is expecting to get this case.
Right.
But Raynella, because he gives this big speech about murder, and that sounds really bad for her. But then he starts talking about her and her, and what they proved or not proved. And so that's when it's becoming apparent. I'm sitting there going, I don't know who was the producer over there, but I was going, oh my God, he's going to throw this thing out. But when he actually said the words, and she looks up, and she was grinning. It's the first time I've seen true expression on this woman's face.
And there was an audible gasp.
Yes, yes. Even she didn't expect.
Exactly.
Right? I just was, I don't know how long I stood there with my mouth hanging open, but I just thought, oh my goodness. And I wanted to know why. Why did Paul Summers, I can't use that word, it's a gutsy move for any judge to step in and take the place of the jury, and especially in a case that's been tried now 3 times. She high profile, the whole thing.
And he's not a Knox County judge. He was a special judge, a senior judge brought in, formerly had been the Attorney General for the state of Tennessee.
Absolutely.
So in this case, not only did it grab us, this is the case books are made out of, podcasts are made out of, series are made. This story went far and wide. Mm-hmm. What does that tell you about this trial? Just how crazy, not this trial, the many trials, this case in general. Mm-hmm. And you both have said you've covered lots of trials. Where does it fall in your bank of trials that you've covered?
I'm just going to be honest and say, to me, this is one of the biggest injustices I've seen. As I said, I cover hundreds of trials, and I write them straight up. What happens, happens, right? But you're sitting there watching it, and I always tried to watch it like a juror. And I didn't always agree with juries sometimes. And that's, I think part of that is I do know more probably than they do going into a case. But in this case, I believed, watching that trial and having watched the other 2, that there was little doubt. I would have voted guilty. And the fact that they didn't even get the chance to do it I wanted to know from Paul Summers about this. And so I did a story about him after they call it a directed verdict. But, and I talked a little bit about, the cowboy boots, and he's known kind of as a maverick. He's always been a very opinionated, he looks like your classic movie, from way back in the day, the Southern.
Kind of a Matlock.
Yes, yes, very much so. He's got that drawl, and he's a smart man, very smart man. But, so we had he and I and his legal assistant, we had some conversations. And ultimately, they reached out and said that he was interested in doing a book about this case. And so, and they were wondering if I might be interested. I wanted to sit down and hear from them, and I did. And we talked at length over a few visits. And the thing that he said that stunned me, and that I really was not fully aware of, he went to law school with Ed Dossett. And he knew and socialized with Ed and Raynella.
Okay.
He thought a lot of Raynella. That in itself should have been grounds for a motion to recuse, and yet the state never made it. Why would the defense?
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
The defense ain't going to make that motion. State never made it. I've wondered ever since then. I'm not disparaging the prosecutors, but if you have a case that's handed to you on a silver platter, you don't work as hard. Mm-hmm. And I just don't think that they really looked into Paul Summers' relationship with Raynella Dossett and Ed Dossett. But one of the things he said to me was that he didn't believe it. He didn't believe it. When it first happened, when there was questions raised about Ed's death, he did not believe it. And he did not believe that she killed David Leath. He did not think her capable of that.
And despite the evidence that was played out time after time after time.
And let me make this clear. That was his belief going into the case. Going into the case. And his posture was that the state needed to convince him beyond a reasonable doubt. They didn't, therefore he chucks it. It was very personal. And I respect Paul Summers. Mm-hmm. But he didn't hide that to me. So the state could have found that out, I think, or gauged that. But that's bothered me ever since. And I will say for the record, I declined to participate in the book.
To be clear in the way our process works, if I'm a judge and I know you, we've socialized in the past or whatever, I have some familiarity with you, it is common practice. It is a no-brainer to make sure everybody understands that, and maybe even go the next step and say, to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest, I can't get involved in this. That is the way things are supposed to work.
Do we know anything about Raynella today?
I think she lives quietly. We're having this conversation in October. This is a birth month for her. I think she's about to have a birthday, I think about number 77. I don't know. Her daughters are very protective, as you would understand, in respect of her. I get that. I don't hear a lot about her myself. I don't know about you.
No, I reached out to Josh Hedrick when I was still at the Sentinel. We did a podcast, Suspicion. I'll throw that out there. It's still around.
No,
but we sort of lobbied to be able to talk to her, and she declined. And he spoke for her. But I agree with John. I think that she's just living a very quiet life. She's probably, if I'm in her shoes, I'm the most grateful woman on the face of the planet, because she really escaped what ought be a life sentence.
She's not ever really talked about this at all, about any of it. I can remember during the Steve Walker stuff, there were at least a couple times where I'd be in the courtroom and she'd be in the courtroom, and it would just be us. There'd be nobody else. And she would just smile or look at me, acknowledge me, and I would nod my head or whatever, but she never said boo.
And she's never gone and said, I'm sorry, to Steve Walker. She shot at the guy, trying to kill him. Nope.
And here we are, these many years later. Let's, guys,
I
thank
just
you.
will not go close to the Solway Road farm. Not me.
We'll leave it at that right there. All right. Jamie, John, thank you very much. Of course, it is a saga that spanned decades and trials, and questions remain today. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Behind the Headline. We hope you'll join us next week for another episode.